All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to our a suicide awareness podcast. That's what I've kind of been advertising it as. But welcome. My name's Hannah Bart. I am a Twitch broadcaster. I've been streaming for about 3.5 years. I do Nintendo content, but I'm big on mental health and suicide awareness. So I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Lodi, you can go first.
Hi, my name's Lodi. I'm a variety caster, and I've been streaming on Twitch for, honestly, I can't remember, but I've been a Twitch partner for 4 years. I do retro and variety. First time doing a cast like this, but I'm looking forward to learning a lot of new things and hopefully have a lot of insightful questions that will be enlightening for many people.
Great. Okay, and now it's our guest of honor. Barb, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us who you are.
Wow, I'm going to be the guest of honor.
You are.
Hi, I'm Barb Bagulke. I am the executive director and founder for the Center for Suicide Awareness, and we're located in Kaukauna, Wisconsin. So this is my first podcast, so I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's basically just going to be conversation format, but we're going to go through some topics, and I know Lodi has prepared some questions. That can kind of help us dive deeper into some subjects. And basically, the main point is to kind of connect it with Twitch, because you kind of talked about how important connecting with the gaming community is. So we'll get into that in a second. But Barb, you have a couple degrees. Do you want to talk about your degrees and what your certification is?
I have a few degrees. My background actually is in human development, counseling, and psychotherapy. And previously came from working with law enforcement, and so worked in the crisis intervention portion of things. So very much firsthand saw the impact of what suicide affected people and what happens when people struggle with their mental health.
Great. Cool. Well, that can kind of segue into our first topic. So I feel like suicide has kind of been a topic that's been in the news more often lately. And I just want to kind of delve in, why is talking about suicide and the awareness, the prevention, the support, all those things, why are they so important, in kind of the time that we have right now?
I think anytime we hear, recently we just heard of 2 celebrities in 1 week who died by suicide, Kate Spade and of course, Anthony Bourdain. And, that brings awareness up, but then it sort of slowly goes back down. And I think we just really have to stay on tune that actually suicide rates have actually increased in the United States by 25%.
Whoa.
And that just came out from the CDC report, the Center for Disease Control.
May I ask in what time frame that increased?
That was in 1 year. That was 2017.
Wow.
Holy.
And so, when you start to look at those kind of statistics, it's really something that we do need to take notice of, because we call that's epidemic proportion.
Wow.
And so that was just released by the CDC of, that's all the way across the board. That's not just one state or one area, that's our whole country. And so, we always feel bad to say, why does somebody have to die for us to have awareness? So we think it should be continually talked about instead of just when someone dies.
So basically preventative and instead of reactionary.
Exactly. Let's be proactive instead of reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Lodi. Did you have something?
Oh, so I had a question related to, I suppose, the statistics. Now, is that across the board, or is that affecting certain demographics more?
What's interesting about suicide is it doesn't discriminate. I think that's one of the misconceptions. People always say, oh, it just happens to those people, almost as classifying them. But they cross every single culture, every single gender, every single race, every single socioeconomic. You look at the recent suicides of the celebrities in poster child, they look like they have everything, right?
Correct.
They have the financial means, the celebrity status, yet they're dying by suicide. So we always say it crosses all boards. It does not discriminate.
So one thing that I'm curious about, because you have a very like firsthand experience with this sort of thing, what you're seeing is, um, honestly, like I believe you, and it's very contrary, or it's very contrary to like what I've read online. Is what you'll frequently see is that it's frequently what they'll say like white men is 7 out of 10 of suicides,
Hmm.
and that it affects mostly middle-aged white men is what you'll see. So you're
Right.
saying it's mostly across the board, and like it that is that true, or is it? Would you say it's accurate?
I think what you're referring to is what really is the fastest rising
Okay,
is our middle-aged Caucasian men.
okay,
That we see it at least across the board is not only doubling but tripling as far as our suicide rate. And
wow,
so you look at that, that's our middle-aged men. They're fathers. Some of them are even grandfathers. They're very much of value. And so we are watching that very closely.
interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Barb, when I talked to you a while back, you said you've been kind of seeing, more often in like really young kids.
Yeah.
Has that also kind of been increasing as well?
Yes. It used to be that we'd say it was like the teenage population, which is still a high risk. That's still our second leading cause of death amongst our youngsters. Um, I shouldn't say youngsters, that population that we say is between about 13 and 21. But we're seeing mental health challenges come as early as a 5-year-old. We recently had a 5-year-old that attempted suicide, and we had a 9-year-old that died by suicide. So you think back about what you were doing when you were 9. You're pretty much playing. You were swinging on your swing set type
Right.
of thing, much less thinking that your life isn't worthy. So we're taking that really seriously to say, why is it that we're seeing a lower and lower age rate?
Okay, cool.
So that's interesting because I know there's a lot of science behind um, children and like what they perceive from their parents. Apparently, there's a lot of science that will indicate that, for example, like the facial expressions that the mother makes, like during early ages, can imprint onto the child, and like they can receive like, feelings of
Yeah,
anxiety from just the face of the mother. And if the
absolutely.
mother is like stressed out, for example, like that can be passed on to the child very early on.
Absolutely. Our nonverbal emotions, facial expressions of rolling eyes, that expression of, like you said, being stressed out. That's a great example. That certainly is passed on. Sometimes it's not just the words that we speak, it's what we convey in our body language. And
Hmm.
so, if you're always sort of coming across sort of always stressed out, yeah, you're going to have a stressed out household and a stressed out kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, like I would imagine that fearfulness is something that's like felt, maybe not even necessarily stated. But yeah, I do believe in like the power of body language conveying what they say is like over what 60, 70% of body language is like
Yeah.
communication there. Like, and words only account for like so much.
Yeah,
Hmm.
20%.
Yeah.
20%?
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it's like 80-20.
Wow.
I think I
That's
read that
Well,
insane.
somewhere.
where did we get that expression from? One look, if somebody shot you a certain look, you knew what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we get that expression from, is our looks definitely can define, what's inside, be it anger, be it fear, be it stressed out,
Mm-hmm.
anxiousness, and so forth.
Yeah, I was listening to actually like Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were talking about this a little bit. Um, and he was just talking about like the pressure that some kids are under, that it's really hard for them to like deal with that, especially at a young age when you don't really,
Hmm.
you
Oh,
just don't have
yeah.
a lot of experience with that kind of thing. Do you think that has something to do with it too? I mean, I don't know. I'm just bringing up a topic I heard.
Absolutely. We do a lot of school and community presentations, and it's amazing to hear some of the schedules that, middle school and high schoolers have. It's more like they have a full-time job plus. They're getting up, they're going, getting on a bus early in the morning, they're going to school, full day of school. After school, it's athletics, piano, dance. When do they actually have downtime? And then add in the whole aspect of social media,
Yep.
where a lot of times people will be like, well, I'm on my phone until 1 o'clock in the morning because it's, I got my Snapchat and I got my group chat and so forth and so forth. Not that social media is bad, but it also continually makes us constantly want to be connected as well.
Yep.
So when do you actually sleep?
Yeah. And I also think a little bit about social media is you kind of see like other people's highlight reel. So you see all the good things that they have going on, but you never see the bad. And then you can kind of compare yourself in that way. And I don't know, like you could maybe get bad. I could see how you could get like negative thoughts about that.
That entire fear of missing out thing is something that adults understand. They know that what they're seeing on social media is just a small margin of like what that person's actually doing. And we get that, but a child might not. And they might think that their lives are like inferior or like not as exciting. And definitely I can relate to being that age. And I didn't grow up with the cell phone because they weren't really around back then. But I knew that even still, those feelings were very prevalent, like you're always worried about like what other kids were doing. And at that age, you just don't know any better.
Exactly. You haven't had enough life experience to say, whatever and so forth. And, let's face it, do we put our worst looking pictures on Facebook? No, we put our best looking pictures. I one time had a lady come up to me and said, I went onto a dating site and I put a picture of me when I had my cold and when I just got done running on a treadmill. And I figured if they could like me at those two phases, that I found a date. And I thought, now that's the best way to do it.
That's a good idea.
This is reality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
But you're right. I loved how you said that, Lodi. It's like, okay, they're going to this party or they got invited to this or they're getting a trophy or a medal. And then you're sitting there saying, and what do I got? And we start to measure our self-esteem based on perception instead of reality. And, no one's perfect and no one should try to be perfect.
I agree. I think this is a really good segue actually into talking about like how this is connected to Twitch. Obviously like kids, there's a lot of kids that are on Twitch. They watch they watch Twitch, they do all of these things social media wise, but I think that the gaming community is a really good place to reach. Why do you kind of get that? Like, do you understand why they're doing that? Do they do it like, I know that coping mechanisms are a thing. I guess what do you have to say about like Twitch as a whole and that social media part?
Absolutely. We know that gaming is a coping skill. It definitely is. And it's bringing in that connection. Many times people will say, that's my gaming family, because maybe their gaming family is actually closer than their actual biological family. Mm-hmm. And if it's giving them a support and a network, those are good things. Mm-hmm. It's when we get concerned when somebody has sort of said, I'm checking out of reality. I don't want to have human connection. And I just want to do almost like an addictive portion of gaming. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really a balance, but like anything, in moderation. But I do think that gaming is really important because you do have this network and you have this support group. We know for a fact one of the best things for prevention is having good networking and good support group. And if you have good people, good support, you will have a better chance of prevention.
And that's what's really interesting is because I feel we do outsource a lot of our like mental like capacity. Like we don't really internalize too much. I feel we outsource that to like our support networks. So a lot of times people who are suffering with depression, I feel they're not exactly like calling them mentally ill would be fallacious. Like they're not. They might just lack a network that's supporting them. They might just lack that, but there's nothing wrong with them specifically. It could just be their environment, I feel.
Exactly. Put somebody in a positive environment. Guess what? That positivity wears off on them. Mm-hmm. So many times people will say, I loved how you brought up like depression, put them in a positive where they're supported, where they can talk freely about their mental health and get the support that they need. That is really how you work on prevention.
And I think what's interesting too about, you said, like when they turn to escapism and video games to, support themselves, it's not that they are like disappearing from like mental or rather like human connection altogether. They're looking for connections, but in a more safer place than
Yes.
like say school or like the typical venues for it. So they're looking for a more safe, like
Outlet.
honestly, I can say gaming online, like you usually don't even talk about like what's going on. Like the game is just there and that's what you have in common and you just have a good time and nothing else really comes into play. You don't have to
Yes.
worry about like status or any of that stuff.
And isn't that great when you're in a safe environment where you can just be free to be you, And that's
Mhm.
exactly what gaming does. Like you said, you have one common goal, you're gaming. And
Right.
so it doesn't matter where you're from, what your age is, what clothes you're wearing, what school do you go to, or any of that kind of stuff. It's, hey, let's focus on the game and have fun.
Right. And a lot of times they're just assuming an identity that's not theirs. It's like a fictional character or like one that they've created.
Yeah. And how fun is that? Who hasn't wanted to say, hey, I'd look, cool with this kind of, style or look.
Yeah, when you can customize your character to be who you want to be.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And those are we always talk about healthy coping skills. Those are
Mhm.
healthy coping skills where you are absolutely supported for who you are.
Yeah.
And let's face it, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, high school is the best time of your life." Well, what if it's not? You know what I mean? So then you're
No,
sitting there
no.
going, "Okay, so this is as good as it gets." Well, forget it. So I'm always very careful to say, don't say those cliche things to people because you don't know what they're walking in. Maybe high
Right.
school to them is they're just putting their years in and getting off to their adulthood.
I can tell you that high school was not the top for
No.
me. But I was just gonna say, so like I think also adding in, I know that Lodi can talk about this, is just having your own community on Twitch. Like for me, I know there's people that they come to my stream kind of to have that escape, and they do feel like safe in that environment. They feel like they can be themselves. I feel like one thing that I really enjoyed about Twitch when I first started is that I was actually able to like connect with people
Mm,
on like the passion level I have for gaming. And I think that people really enjoy that about Twitch. And then also, you're kind of like making a friend with that caster as well. And I do think that all those things are really good to be able to connect on that level as well.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to Hannah about this was not so much being the one pillar for everyone, but also empowering your community to do that for themselves. So they have like a support group because that can be a lot of stress for just one person. And this
yes.
was another thing. You said you were like a therapist, correct?
Hmm.
So I recently watched a video of this guy who said he was a therapist for 10 years and why he quit. And a lot of it he said was like he internalized a lot of the things that were being told to him and he was a very empathetic person, but
Yeah.
I was talking to Hannah about why that might not be a great idea as a caster to put yourself in the role of just the pillar for everyone. Now, how do you feel like maybe how casters or therapists can like protect themselves in that sort of way?
That is a great point because you know what? There's a lot of times that, and I love how you use the word pillar, where you're in a position where you sort of are like taking on a lot of the heaviness.
Hmm.
I think of not only therapists, but like, the one main streamer or, the person like I always call like the go to person.
Hmm.
That's a lot to sort of take on. And I always
Right.
say, you know what? You can only give as much as you put back into yourself. So I'm a big believer in you take care of yourself.
Hmm.
So many people say, well, that's being selfish if I take time for myself. And it's like, no, you can only do so much. You can only take so much in.
Right.
That's why you hear people burn out. People will be like, yeah, I was a therapist for 10 years and I burnt out on the field. Well, then you got to be compassionate to yourself just as much as you're compassionate to other people.
Hmm.
And so doing self care is huge. I
I
mean,
agree.
getting rest, if it's meditating, if it's exercising. I hate yoga, so I never recommend yoga, but some people actually like that thing, you know. Um, if it's gaming, if it's doing something that you truly are passionate about and enjoy and that can like fill your bucket back up, do it. Do it. That's what's going to prevent you from burning out.
Yeah, well, and I think too when somebody does need your help and you need to be available, you have to have that like emotional energy ready to like help somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, just for example, I actually had somebody in my community who had his brother-in-law had died by suicide, and he was just like so distraught and all these things. And I was like, hey, let's talk about this after stream. And we just had like a really short conversation. But he was just like, thank you so much for listening. And I think just like being able to be available in those ways is really good. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you obviously take care of yourself. If I was staying up all night and not getting any sleep, or just like running myself ragged, there'd be no way that I would have been able to take the time out and just have like a 20-minute conversation with him.
Right. But what, that 20-minute conversation, I can tell you meant so much to him, because people that have lost somebody to suicide say they feel such like an outcast because of the stigma of suicide. Because let's face it, we can't answer the question why. If they died in a car accident, we can say why. If they died by cancer, we can say why. But suicide leaves that unanswered question of why.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times people won't talk about it. We have support groups where people will say, I actually lie how my loved one died, because it's just easier than getting the questions about suicide. And if we have that strong stigma, it's really up to us as a community to break that stigma.
Yeah, he mentioned how it was just so much harder than anything he'd ever gone through, because it's just different. You can't really explain it.
You
Yeah,
can't.
I've found that a lot of times people just like the act of mirroring, and it's not just offering insight or advice or even like words of support. Sometimes it's just being a pair of ears. And what was interesting, going back to that topic of the therapist that quit, he said that he was there in sessions with a lot of people, crying with the people that he was talking to and like internalizing a lot of it. That's why I also feel like it's really important to, I think fitness and like meditation, that sort of thing, are very important, because it can be hard, like internalizing all of that. Because in the act of helping, I do feel like I feel like energy is transferred back and forth, and if again, like any empathetic person can identify with the feeling of like taking on someone's pain, and that's really what it is. Like you're kind of sharing your pain with someone, and I think it's really important to like take care of yourself, because if you are used to being that pillar, and you're probably gonna pretend to be more stoic than you really are, and you're gonna like ignore the signs that maybe you're not exactly right, or like there's something like maybe creeping up, you might not notice the signs. So I think it's really important to like also have different outlets. And I know sometimes with casters it's a two-way street, where they will also use their communities as a support group and vice versa. Like they're there for them and the community's there for them as well.
Yeah.
Those are the best relationships, that you both can play off of each other. And you're right. I think whatever you can do to take care of your mental health, be it meditate, physical exercise, that's a great way. We know that it naturally, builds up those happy hormones and so forth.
Endorphins.
Yeah. So, whatever works for you, one size doesn't fit all. If meditation is something that grounds you, then do that. If it's just, going out in nature and just having that silence to be it. And also, Lodi, how you said, helping can simply just be honestly sitting in silence with somebody, but they know that you are literally present there.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So we do get these people from our community that sometimes reach out. Like, what warning signs would we want to pay attention to if, someone is kind of consoling in us that they maybe need more help than what we can give them?
Yeah. And, we hear this quite often where people will say, well, they're just doing something for attention. You know what? If somebody's talking about suicide, listen. And if, when people say they're looking for attention, yeah, they're looking for attention. A lot of times people get concerned that if you ask somebody if they're thinking of suicide, that they will actually die by suicide. We know that that's actually false. When you confront somebody and you come to somebody with care and say, I'm really worried about you, things seem to be really coming down on you. You're talking about suicide. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It will be met sometimes with a little anger, like, what? Because you noticed, but majority of time people will feel relief. You noticed that I'm struggling. You noticed that something's going on. I'm a big believer, err on the caution. If they're mad, they're going to be mad temporarily, but they're alive. You know, so getting involved, you don't have to be a therapist to ask those kind of questions, and especially when they're coming from a place of, I really do care about you.
Okay.
So when you talk about warning signs, one of the biggest warning signs is talking about suicide, Googling, there's numerous sites out there about suicide, um, giving away prized possessions. If somebody all of a sudden says, hey, you know what, I love this outfit, but you'd look better on it.
Mm.
Well, what's going on? Why are you giving away your prized outfit that you just love?
Right.
That's a
Okay.
warning
Right.
sign.
Or like a out of the blue phone call, maybe.
You betcha. You betcha. Where all of a sudden somebody that really hasn't connected with you, hey, just saying hi, thanks for being a friend.
Yeah.
What's up with that? And take notice of it.
Mhm.
But
Many a times people will
that's
say they go through their whole contact list and send a text.
interesting. That is really interesting because I will notice with myself, for example, if I'm feeling down, I immediately just want to help other people. And so
Yeah.
that's how I know like there's something like if I'm feeling down, my
Yeah.
knee-jerk reaction is to want to like reach out to people and like help them because that makes me feel better. So I feel like if someone else is doing that, that could be a warning sign.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Absolutely. And especially, this one goes so undetected, perfectionism.
Mm.
It's these people that have no gray area, it's all black or white. They're a loser, they're a winner. And there's no like, hey, what happened to being a C person? Like, C is average.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with being average. And so people that really just have that perfectionism streak, I think, people always say, I didn't see it coming. They had everything going for them. Well, when you're striving to be perfect, that's a pretty high bar to jump over. And
That's
also, too, is when, ever you hear somebody talk about, trying risky behavior, things that are out of character for them. They always wanted to be involved in something and all of a sudden they're not showing up. When they're all of a sudden getting into drugs and alcohol, and that's not really where they came from.
Hmm.
So go with your gut. If you notice a change, bring up those conversations.
That's really interesting that you say that because, like, when I was like in a period of my life where I was like really depressed. And I remember, like, if I wasn't perfect, I was like so mad at myself. So it's really funny that you say that because I feel like, you go past depression, that's where you get those suicidal thoughts. And that, I feel like if you just keep, what I mean? If I was to keep going down that rabbit hole, like, that's where you could end up.
Yeah,
And it's interesting because it's literally unattainable.
it is. Who wants to be perfect? Give me messy hair and sweatpants and I'm pretty much happy. You know, and I think, but that goes back to like that social media. We look at those great pictures that everyone looks so perfect.
Mhm.
But it's like, no, that's not real. We all have bad days. We all have struggling days. We all, sort of look the same when we wake up and haven't had coffee. We're not looking at our best, and that's okay. And I think we don't get that message enough.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why Twitch is so appealing because it's like a live show, and there's no way you could be perfect for 3 or 4 hours at a time all the way through. And I think that's the appeal of people, like they know that you're a real person because you make mistakes, you get angry at the game or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
it's like a great thing that people can actually like experience that with you.
Because we're human. We are human. We make mistakes. We all have gone to work or someplace with stains on our shirt. No one has told us. Or wear your shirt inside out. No one's told you. We've all had those things happen, but we just don't talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about highlighting some of the societal things that may cause this line of thinking because a lot of times I feel there's nothing wrong with us personally. It's like a deep reprogramming we need to like change our perspective on things because,
Yeah.
as aspiring for perfection is not something that's realistic in the slightest. And the thing is, a lot of people know this, but it's a irrational line of thinking. Like they know it's wrong, but they still feel compelled to think that way anyway.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times you just have to have that real conversation with someone and just highlight all these societal things that are reinforcing bad ways of thinking.
Yep. It's
Mhm.
almost like we have to do a paradigm shift of
Hmm.
just saying, you know what? Stop thinking that think that we have to be so high up the board. I recently did a high school presentation, and these kids were freshmen, okay, and they were all stressed out about what college they were going to go to. Okay, they're freshmen. They haven't even got through their high school, and one of the kids is like, well, how did you pick your college, Barb? Did you go through like all these different Excel spreadsheets and did you, match up different ones? And I looked at her and I said, you know what? There were a whole bunch of brochures out there, and this one brochure from Arizona State had some really cute boys on the brochure, and that's where I went to school.
That's funny.
And she's like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, yeah, I did.
Mhm.
And it worked out. I think we just have these unrealistic expectations that we're supposed to know what we're supposed to be doing at 18, 19, 20, 25, 35, and then, middle-aged men like you were talking about, Lodi.
Hmm.
So what is that when we're, maybe in their 50s or 55? It's like, what's that chapter supposed to look like?
Mhm.
Yet people are living until well into their 90s. And so I think you're right. We got to sort of change this cultural thing of saying, hey, you know what? Where you're at is okay.
Mhm.
And I think why it affects men disproportionately is because a lot of them, I feel, they think their worth is connected to their ability to provide. And
Yes.
once you take away like their job or their ability to find employment,
Yeah.
they feel like their worth has just plummeted because maybe they just put all their eggs in one basket. And
Yes.
um, one of my grandmother's brothers had died by suicide because he was in the military, and then when he got back, he had trouble finding a job.
Yeah.
And those two things in tandem, like together, were like really toxic for him. And
Yes.
from what I understand, like he was way too young to go. But those two things, especially in that time period, it was just too much.
And you brought up a good point about, people will say, is it one thing? Suicide is really a long what
Mhm.
has happened with them. And so you brought up, it's sort of that you use the word toxic, it's like he had military experience, so some of the trauma from that,
Mhm.
and then coming back and saying, so, I was good enough to go fight for our country and fight for our freedom, but now I come back and I can't even find a job. How deflating is that on your self-esteem?
Yeah.
Let's face that.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, we put these unrealistic goals on some of our male population. You're supposed to be this provider, like you said, and yet you're supposed to be feeling, yet you're not supposed to cry. We have so many mixed messages. And then let's face it, we have a tendency to put the identity with a man. So you come up and say, first thing you say is, hey, what do you do for a living?
Mhm. Hate
And
that
what if you
question.
say, I'm unemployed or I'm
Right.
underemployed? All of a sudden, like you see this chart going down.
Right.
Mhm.
It's like, really?
Well, it can be a
So,
very probing question too.
oh yeah, yeah. Let's face it, in our life chapters. I mean, there's chapters in my life that I'm like, yeah, that was a real highlighter. But we don't we
Mhm.
don't talk about that. We
Mhm.
don't talk about job changes or times that people get fired or let go or laid off, or the economy is bad or any of that things. We tie it up with this is your identity.
Yeah. No, I agree. Do you think that has some correlation, like these celebrities? Do you think that they get to like a certain amount of success and they're just like, I don't know what to do now because I'm well, I did hear that like after you make like $75,000 a year, like the amount of happiness kind of like levels off. So like you can only get so much happiness from material things, and like we see that kind of. I feel like with a lot of celebrities, like they just kind of taper off and don't know how to be happy after that.
I agree. It's like you sit there and you go, so how many cars can you drive at one time? How many houses that you can live in at one time? You know, and if you sort of like put your identity in like, I got stuff and I got materialism stuff, well, what happens when you actually can buy whatever you want? Then it's like, so what else is there? So,
That's why I think it's really important to define yourself with more than what you've acquired. I think like what you stand for, like people
Yes.
you've helped along the way, what you're good at, like arts and crafts, or like maybe you can like speed read or whatever. These are all things that comprise your identity. And if
Yes.
you have eggs in different baskets, then if you haven't put them all in one thing, like your employment status, then you're not going to be, hit like so hard when that thing is gone suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting when I go into like, do educations, and the first thing I'll ask is one of the students, I'll be like, tell me one thing you're good at. Tell me one skill thing you're at. And they're like they can't name one thing, and like you said,
Mhm.
like, so they're good at arts and crafts. They can sing, they can write, they can twirl a baton. We don't every day say to ourselves, we are good at something.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And when you start that downward spiral of, I'm not good enough, I'm never going to be this popular, and so forth, you can like just slide into that suicidal thinking
Right.
because you start to say, well, I'm never good enough.
Mhm.
And we all are good enough. We all have talents. I can't draw, but there's people that can draw. You know, Everybody has purpose and everybody has talents, but we just don't promote those kind of things every day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I think, it's interesting that, when you were talking about self-care, like you're talking about like the person that's sort of burnt out after 10 years, if every day we actually said something good about ourselves, I wonder what kind of change we'd have in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or even just empowering people to be like mini therapists to each other instead of relegating that to one role or one person to take care of everyone else, giving it a job position. Like if we were all like, our own therapists for other people in
Yes.
our social structure, like then it wouldn't just have to be given to one person and maybe they wouldn't have to burn out, because this guy said that it actually started affecting him not just mentally but physically. Like he said he started, like he got colitis and
Oh, yeah.
like his health was deteriorating fast and he just took on more than he could chew.
Oh, definitely. I know when I'm not taking care of myself, self-care, I'll just feel tired, I'll feel let down, and then I'm like, hey, I can't put out, a lot of light if I'm not taking care of
Exactly.
myself.
Mhm.
And so, people say it's silly. It's like, but I have all these like affirmations everywhere, like you are worthy, you are good enough. Today is a good day to have positive stuff.
Mhm.
But you know what? If you start having that positiveness, you eventually start to have that positive environment and give it to somebody else. I love how you
Right.
said that we could all be like mini therapists, or
Mhm.
like mini cheerleaders.
Mhm.
If we started high-fiving people instead of saying, oh, well, let me tell you all the wrong things that you've done, I think we'd have a little bit of a more mentally healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. I agree.
I agree. Yeah, I think empowerment is not something I see happen too often. Like
No.
more likely to see people,
Tear each other
cut each other
down.
down to get ahead. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
see a whole lot of like leadership qualities in people. And I've always felt like being a builder is something that's going to fulfill you spiritually, you know?
Absolutely. We should be able to fill other people's buckets up by just simple words. It doesn't have to be this huge course in affirmations and stuff like
Hmm.
that. By simply telling somebody, hey, I really appreciate your friendship. Or, when you said
Hmm.
this was perfect because I was having a down day. That literally can change somebody's attitude.
Mm-hmm.
We know that. We've had notes pinned to the center that it will say something like, I saw you on a TV program and you just talked about you have purpose. And that was all I needed to hear because I've never heard that I had purpose before. So don't ever underestimate that you can be a mini therapist. I'm going to use that now from now on. Okay, Lodi, about the mini therapist
Cool.
thing.
Is that a
that you can,
trademark at the end?
yep. Put a little T with a little circle on it.
Trademark loading.
That you say something positive to somebody or you lift somebody up or empower them, that can change their whole day. And you don't know if they've never heard a positive thing for a long time.
Mhm.
Right, absolutely. And I think, and this is just something I believe, but I feel as though compliments to not just like someone's character, but like something they've done. For example, if you're like complimenting something,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see quite frequently in YouTube comments, for example, like someone would just say like, "Oh, you're a genius, you're like this, you're that." But I feel like if you compliment what someone has created, that's actually more fulfilling
Mm-hmm.
instead of like glorious praise that someone's likely to reject. They're like, oh, I'm not a genius. Like, well, I know this person's lying. But if you like compliment something someone's done, like, I really like how
your
you,
content.
right. Or like, and describe why. And I think a lot of casters don't hear that too. So that's a reason why they burn out, is because they don't always hear that affirmation that they're doing the right thing. And that has a lot to do with what specifically you're doing and not your actual like character, I feel. If you're a creator, you want to hear that the thing that you've created is like something that people like, not so much like, oh, you're a genius. You're like the most talented person I know, or something like
It's
that.
got to be more genuine, yeah. Like more real feeling for sure.
Yeah, because you want them to feel the passionate, whatever like you created or whatever you're bringing up to, because that's part of them. And so you're really connecting to them at a deeper level.
Oh
Instead
yeah,
of, like,
absolutely.
you're a genius. It's like, no,
Yeah.
but
Exactly.
notice me for like what I brought to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So, and let's face it, a lot of times people will walk by, oh, hey, how are you? And they're like halfway down the hallway. It's like, well, how do you know what I was saying? Being present and being mindful when you're talking to somebody is another character that we really have to look at. That if somebody does say, I'm really not doing too well, that you're at least there. So, and you don't have to be, you can be your mini therapist. I'm using it as trademark for you, Lodi.
So, I actually have a question though, because you kind of just reminded me of something. When you ask someone how their day is going, and I find that a lot of people who are depressed or might be dealing with suicidal thoughts are unlikely to maybe say how they're really feeling because they feel shame for sharing that with someone. So how can you really tell? What are some ways that maybe you can tell from someone's response that maybe they're not okay, because they might say, oh, I'm good, or like, I'm fine. Maybe it might be a bit of a red flag there.
Or
like,
sometimes you'll get like, I'm doing all right, but I'll be okay. Like that kind of thing.
Yes. I think that's a great question. A lot of times people are like, I always say they put up their mask, It's like, hey, if I really tell you that I'm really struggling with stuff, you're going to book it and I might not be your friend anymore, or you're going to think less of me. And you brought up shame. There is nothing shameful. We should not be shaming each other for struggling. That happens to every single person. And if they say they're not, then they're lying.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always say people that say that there's nothing in their closet, that, they have stuff going on, it just means that they're holding their closet tighter than the rest of us. So
might as well be open about it.
Might as well be open about it,
And there's different beliefs out there. I know like particularly in Buddhism, they view the default like human condition as being like a struggle or a tragedy. So like pretending that everything's 100% great at all times is like just not true, and like we know that about ourselves. So
yeah, it's actually it's the opposite of Buddhism. By pretending and being untrue to yourself, that everything is fine. And so like when you were talking about how do you really know, I think getting to know somebody, what their fake smile versus their real smile, and also we're so good about like, oh, it's their business, I don't want to get into their business. Well, when you're talking about depression and possibly suicide, yeah, it's everybody's business. It's time to hop that line and get into their business. And so like, Hannah, like when you brought up, it's like, well, I'm okay, and I'll be okay. Take that one step more. Say, yeah, well, what's going on? What's going on that you're not okay right now? Giving them the ability to say, I'm safe. I really want to get down and know about it. Not claiming that all the answers, because, let's face it, there's all those people like, oh yeah, I know everything. No, but just sort of saying, I don't maybe know what to say, but at least I'm here for you, and maybe we can figure it out together. That can really open up a conversation.
And I've actually found that when people do have that mask and they don't give you a truthful answer when you first ask how they're okay, if you just like prod just a little bit, oftentimes that second question will get you the answer. Like they will open up. And especially if you don't phrase it in a way that's like in any way judgmental, you're just like presenting yourself as a listener. I find most people will actually take that opportunity. So if you just like go one step further, a lot of times people will open up.
I so agree with you. I think, sometimes it's fear based. Like,
Mm,
ooh, if I ask that second question, they're going to get mad at me. It's like, hey, ask that second question to show that you're human and you care.
Yeah.
hmm
I don't think anyone's ever gonna get mad at you for that either. I mean,
Because a lot,
if it's nothing, they're gonna be like, no, I'm good. It's totally fine.
because, and the reason why I think that's important is because a lot of times saying "How are you" is just a greeting,
Mm-hmm.
but if you ask again or like really
Yeah.
um, ask that second time, that shows it's more than a greeting.
Right. Yep. That you're willing to invest in that conversation if it leads to even farther down the line. And what gift that is to somebody to say, I'm investing in you as a person, to
hmm
say whatever's going on, I really want to help about it. So
hmm
good questions. Very good questions.
Thank you.
Great. Great answers too. I'm learning so much today. Um, so I don't know if you have anything else on that subject, Lodi, but I know that you kind of wanted to talk about. Well, we talked about warning signs, and did we talk about triggers really? I don't know if that was like kind of in there or what exactly you would define triggers as. I mean, you just said like the triggers are like just the things that you would notice about somebody, correct?
Well, triggers can be two things, what you notice, sort of as warning signs, but a lot of times we don't know where someone has come from. We don't know the journey that they've traveled. And so sometimes people will be triggered by something we say or do. I know like people that have lost somebody to suicide will say things like, I can't stand when somebody says the word they committed suicide.
hmm
And we'll be like, okay, meaning the word committed has that connotation, right? They commit a sin, they commit a crime, and suicide's neither.
hmm
And so it's really saying they died by suicide. And so those could be triggers as well.
So
Um,
gotcha, just using the right verbiage when you're
yeah,
talking to
just having
somebody.
that sensitivity to say, and that takes away the shame as well
Mm-hmm.
as the blame.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, in suicide, a lot of times people they'll say, "What did I miss? What did I do wrong? What did I? The shoulda, coulda, wouldas we call them." And in the essence, it's not. There is no blame
Mm-hmm.
into it.
And there's another really important one is like if they have attempted suicide and they call it a failed attempt,
Oh yes,
and like them surviving is called a failed attempt, like they were supposed to succeed otherwise. That right there, I think the connotation of that is highly destructive.
exactly. Because you know what? Let's face it. When somebody gets to that dark point where they really feel like suicide is more of an option than living, they're already feeling like they failed.
Mm-hmm.
And
hmm
so now they attempt suicide. Thankfully, they're alive. And then you compound it by saying, oh, you failed at this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, great. You just put like injury on top of the already injured.
The other really interesting one that I heard about was saying like they completed suicide. So
Right.
that's almost like has this like success connotation to it,
Yeah.
like that is
Yes.
equivalent to like you completed like college or you completed like a task.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Like you should get a certificate after it.
Right.
It's not. That's why we're really very cognitive about using the words, they died by suicide, or they attempted suicide. And
hmm
Attempted.
thankfully they're alive. But completed or victim of or success, those have some really heavy connotations to them. So we steer clear of them.
Could you go into more detail about the victim of one?
Um, sometimes people will say they were a victim of a suicide attempt,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like they attempted, sort of like going back with your failed. It's like, oh, they became a victim of a suicide attempt. They didn't, die by suicide.
hmm
Um, they're not a victim. They were struggling and they attempted suicide. And now how do we help them?
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of times people will get mixed up. Like somebody will say, "I'm a survivor of suicide." That means that they've lost somebody to suicide,
Okay.
a loved one, a family member, or so forth. So a lot of times people will think that survivor means like that they survived a suicide attempt, but we use that term more with the people that are left behind.
Yeah, and this one's kind of obvious, but I read it in a little blog post actually I posted on your Facebook page. Um, but just saying, oh crap, now I lost it. Hold on.
I have those moments all the time because
Died by
why? We're not perfect.
suicide. Yeah, exactly. Oh, So like when somebody like say for example like in this article this girl's dad had died by suicide, and like when people would ask her, you know, how did your dad die, she would say obviously it died by suicide, and then like the next thing that a lot of people would ask that would like really hurt her was like how did he do it,
Yes.
versus like the way they put it in the article, which was like a better way. I feel like a better way to like go in the conversation was, you know, what was he like before, or you know, something like
Yeah.
that, just asking about like who he was as a person versus
Yes.
you know like how it happened.
You're right. You know, when somebody dies of cancer, we don't sit there and want to know all the details, right? We never pride, you know, we give them respect and dignity. But you're right, Hannah, it's like the first thing they say is, oh, they died by suicide. Oh, really? And how?
Mm-hmm.
They want to know the method. And it's sort of taking away that, you know, that was her father and what was his like and what was his name and tell me some of his hobbies and what did you like to do with your dad? You're sort of taking away all of his life by just defining it as that one moment of when he died by suicide.
Yep. Yeah. Is there any other like verbiage that we should like learn? Because I know, I didn't know like any of this before I met you, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been saying it wrong my whole life.
But don't feel, you know what? At least you're asking about it. You know, how many times do people walk around and don't even ask? And, you know, it could be hurtful to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think just being respectful. I'm glad you brought up about, you know, not asking somebody, so how did they die? If they want to disclose it, they'll disclose it.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that sometimes people are so afraid to bring up somebody that died by suicide. So somebody will say, you know, I'm in the grocery store, and they'll like totally avoid me, or they'll totally not, you know, mention about it. And then they'll say, well, I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to, you know, bring it up to them in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they already have it on their mind.
Yeah.
You know, they've lost somebody. We don't do that with any other death than suicide.
Yeah.
You know, and that goes back to that stigma, the shame, and the blame. We should treat suicide like any other death.
So just
We
treat it.
somebody and grieve and mourn that we lost somebody that was, you know, loved and cared for.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever get? I know that there's like sometimes there is like, oh, maybe this is a little racy topic to bring up, but like I know that like in some religions it's like looked on differently. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like situations that I've been in where it's been weird, and that's why I feel like it's in those situations, like you know, like a Catholic. That's where I wouldn't bring it up. Would you kind of avoid that as well, or would you still treat it normal? Okay.
No, you know, we know research shows that somebody, when they're in their suicidal mind, their serotonin level is absolutely at a very low point. And what does serotonin do? Serotonin actually gives us the ability to make processing decisions. You know, you can't do geography when you have low serotonin levels.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not thinking clearly either
Mm-hmm.
when you have low serotonin levels. And so at that point, they have such unclear thinking. So how do we say that they should put a judgment call on it for religion? And I can tell you, with all the experience in working with, you know, crisis and law enforcement and so forth, I have read so many suicide notes. I cannot think of one suicide note that didn't say, God, forgive me.
Gotcha.
So that concept of like eternal damnation is like I mean, it would be sort of silly not to really look at the roots of our country and how that's still very deeply embedded into it. And so, yeah, I do remember like seeing that a lot in like different suicide notes. And I think also something that's important to mention is you talked about serotonin levels, but then also how much do other substances maybe affect that judgment as well, like alcohol or other things? Do you find like a lot of cases involve that sort of thing?
You know, let's face it, we know very little about our minds. You know, our minds are crazily like filled with so much stuff, and we know just this much about it. And so, you know, a lot of times medication will actually make somebody more suicidal than they were off medication. Sometimes sort of we're just sort of figuring out, like, are we raising their serotonin? But we're not. And, it's sort of like sometimes like a gambling, saying I'm on this many medications and I hope it raises that. But we're such an individual that our body chemistry is so different. Something that I take might affect me different than something that you take, Hannah, versus something. And then add in alcohol. People always think that alcohol is like, woohoo, it makes you great. But alcohol is a depressant. And so think about that. So yeah, it may give you that little bit of high, but if you're already depressed and now you're on alcohol, now you're really
it's going to exacerbate that. I did read that in a lot of cases of male suicides that alcohol was prevalent in a lot of cases, and that men were also more prone to like more impulsive decisions to attempt.
Sure. And also, too, is men have a tendency to use more lethal means. Men will pick up a firearm versus women might pick up pills. Yet we're seeing a rise in women using firearms. So that rate is coming back up. And so when we hear that, men die by suicide higher, it's because of the lethal means that they choose.
Yeah, they pick the things that are going to work the best.
Right.
Okay. Right. And so, when we hear about substance abuse and, chemicals and, prescription drugs and alcohol, you're sort of making a cocktail that just is not healthy for your brain, and let's face it, do we make our best decisions when we're under the influence of, alcohol?
Nope.
No. That's one of the things, Hannah, you've I think did our beer glasses that we did. We teamed up with the Tavern League, and we have our text line in the bars. And so many people were like, but that's promoting drinking. It's like, no, people do go to the bars. And sometimes those bartenders are really the mini therapists that you were talking about, Lodi, because it's like, guess what? I'm going through a job loss. I'm going through divorce. And it's like they hand them a beer glass that has the Hope line on it and says, hey, let's start this conversation. You meet people where they're at, you're going to have a better chance of prevention. And so, and to go back to your point, Lodi, we do see that a lot. A lot of times people that have attempted will say, you know what, I sort of had that liquid courage. I had a couple beers because I really didn't want to die by suicide, but I just didn't know what to do. When we talk to people that have attempted suicide, they will tell us overall, they did not want to die by suicide. They just didn't want their inner pain to continue.
Okay.
And so, and when you talk to people that have attempted suicide, I'll never forget this one gentleman that he attempted suicide, and thankfully he lived, but he was saying that he walked to a bridge, and he said all he could remember was just like the bridge was calling him. And by the time the police came, they were like, sir, are you okay? And how can we help you? Are you married? Can we call your wife? And he had no idea of his name. He had no idea that he was married other than he had a wedding ring on his hand. He had no idea how he got to the bridge.
Wow.
It was, and if you think about that unclear thinking at that time, and this man was married for, well over 30 years, but he had no recollection of walking from his house to this bridge. All he remembers is just that this bridge was sort of like calling his name. And so, like, going back to your original question, Hannah, about religion. So how do we judge people for that? That's a human judgment. That's certainly not a faith or a spiritual thing.
Well, I just always thought it was so sad that people wouldn't accept them into the church if they had died by suicide. I always thought that was so sad. So I don't know. I was just like a touchy subject, I feel like, for some religions, I guess.
And I think it's a touchy. I think it's personal. But like I said, I mean, I can tell you every single suicide note that I've ever read, it always had God forgive me. It's like, so at that moment they were saying, hey, I'm asking for forgiveness. So
I had a question about, so how do you feel about when these things get televised or like a celebrity doing it? Do you feel like in any way that gets maybe romanticized, or you think it has a good effect or a bad effect in raising awareness?
I think it's all how it's approached. I I don't like when they give this whole big thing of like, oh, then they were, then we find out, oh, they were suffering from depression, or they were, almost like, oh, and that's the reason,
Right.
and it's sort of like it covers everything.
Hmm.
Um, I think if you really want to talk about it, then we need to continually talk about it, not just when they die, but every single day, talking about, how do we prevent it? How do we talk? Who can we turn to, and so forth. I think many a times people will be like, well, they sort of romanticized it. I think when you start to get where it's like, oh, they had this and they had this status and they had this money and they had this bank account and they had this, you start to try to measure yourself up to it. So I remember one time this wonderful, wonderful teenage boy died by suicide that was really sort of like the all-American boy, that you would see, sports, you name it. And this kid came up and said, Barb, if this kid who has it all going on died by suicide, why wouldn't a loser like me die by suicide?
But I feel like you have to change your framework and your perspective on that, because it should be illuminating that it affects everyone despite all of those things,
Yeah.
instead of
Exactly.
because of them.
Exactly. And I can tell you from working with the people that have lost somebody to suicide, that's something you never get over. You
Hmm.
never get over losing somebody to suicide because you literally cannot answer why did they die.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so, that whole perspective, like you said, we need to change that, where instead of sort of, okay, how many days did we hear about Kate Spade and Anthony or Robin Williams, right? When Robin
Mhm.
Williams died by suicide, he was what made everybody laugh. But then we go back down to, oh, it won't happen to anybody until it happens again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think really just continually breaking those barriers and talking about stuff. Let's face it. I always say if I want to clear a room, I can talk about suicide. It's not a comfy, fluffy subject, but it's a subject that people are dying by, and I think you were talking about, Lodi, about, the person that died that was in the military.
Right.
20 to 22 of our veterans die a day in the United States of America by suicide.
So does that put the figure around like 1/5 or so? Is it like 122 a day, I believe, or so? Or is it?
You think about that, the statistic shows that more of our veterans have died by suicide than in combat.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And that's just not acceptable.
Mhm.
These are people that signed on a dotted line to fight for our freedoms, and they're dying by suicide. So I think that issue a lot of times does not get any kind of light.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you think about, if we had whooping cough. I remember when for a while there, everybody was like wearing masks because whooping cough was going through, or,
Mhm.
whatever kind of flu that we're having. And we're outraged, right? But yet 22 of our veterans die a day, or 20, whatever the statistic is for the day,
Mhm.
die a day. And, we don't seem to have that outrage, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost like it's become expected. And I know from reading certain things from people who have served, I read a tweet the other day where someone said that all they ever wanted to do when they came back was reintegrate, and they didn't want to be put on this pedestal like, thank you for everything
Yeah.
you've done. And they said that they didn't actually like that they just wanted to be like everyone else when they came back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They just wanted to be normal. They just wanted to adapt and go back to it. And also, too, is we're seeing for the first time this war is where, people aren't just going to war and coming back.
Mhm.
They're going 1, 2, 3, 5 rounds and coming back. Well, how do you actually go to 5 tours of duty and then come back and say, so do you want cauliflower or broccoli for supper?
Right.
Right.
That's pretty big jumps, to
Mhm.
simulate. And so we need to address those kind of things, because those are the people that fought for us.
Hmm.
So and two is we have got to not just be compliant that we're saying, yeah, it just happens. When the suicide rate is 25% higher, we shouldn't just be sitting on our hands and saying, I guess it is what it is. It's epidemic, and what do we do about it? So doing these kind of things and talking about it, it might make people uncomfortable. And like Hannah, you said sometimes it's those touchy situations. Well, sometimes I think we have to get uncomfortable to start getting things done.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
agree.
And I know that like at least in the past, I haven't seen anything ever done like this on Twitch or like even really a lot on like YouTube or stuff like that. Like I just think that it's important that we start talking about this stuff. And I think the better that we understand it, the better it's going to get. You know what I mean? Cuz everybody's going to
But
know better what to do when they're in those situations where, you know, you could be that person that talks to somebody that makes their day and it just turns their whole world around.
And I can say for a fact that within the Twitch community, everybody knows of either a caster or a viewer or a friend of a viewer that has died by suicide. It is something that affects the Twitch community. It is, I find, almost looked down upon. There's like a culture of like not wanting to bring it up just because of like killing the vibe, so to speak.
yep.
And because a lot of communities are based on positivity, and
Hmm.
so they feel like they don't have a outlet for that. So if they
Hmm.
feel concerned about it, they don't know where to go. I have a channel on my Discord where basically anyone can talk about what's going on with their day, and I I'm
We
sorry.
got you.
Oh, so I have a channel, and people can talk about anything that's going on with their days, and it's a good venting room. I find that
Cool.
if every caster had something like that, it doesn't have to be in their actual chat, but as long as it's there
Hmm.
where they can find it and you can direct them to that or like your DMs. Because I do understand maybe from a standpoint of not wanting to open the floodgates, so to speak, to that in your
Hmm.
community.
Hmm.
But I do think it is really important to have that somewhere.
I agree. I agree. People need that outlet, you know.
Mhm.
Let's face it, we all need some safe place to just
Mhm.
vent.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you giving that sort of space, Lodi, to just say, hey, you can sort of put it in this and let it go. Sometimes that's all people need to do,
And I'll
you
type in
know?
there too, honestly. Like I'll be in there,
Oh
just as
yeah.
often as anyone else. So I feel like by example, I hope I'm encouraging people to do the same. And has become more of like a support network as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And we can set our own models. I think when we ourselves sort of say, wow, you know what, today was an awful day, we allow other people to say, oh, you have bad days or your day wasn't so good. It shows our imperfections and it allows
Mhm.
them to have the safety to say, yeah, I had a really bad day too.
Mm-hmm.
So we can model that as well, which is positivity. And when you were talking about how sometimes, when you're on the game, it's supposed to be fun. It's like, wow, you just brought me down because you were talking about suicide.
Mhm.
If you help that person get through that struggle and you ultimately save their life, how much of a opposite of a downer is it? Very few people in life can say they saved somebody's life, and so if you know the warning signs, you know how to get involved, you want to get involved, that's the biggest positive you can ever say that you've done in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think of, the butterfly effect of doing that too, because maybe if you save someone's life, they would
Yep.
go on to do the same thing for someone else, or maybe they could go on to do something that's so beneficial to their environment. And then you're the catalyst for all that. Like, think about how much of an influence you might have, just that butterfly effect. And it's like
Mhm.
that person affects three people, and those people affect three people each, and then
Yeah.
suddenly, before you know it, like your entire environment's like uplifted just starting at that one point.
Yep. That's how you change a culture.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
how you change to saying instead about let's pick on each other's differences, let's find our similarities. And, if I give three people words of encouragement or I notice three people that are struggling and help them, they go on to help more and more. That's how you
Mm-hmm.
change the paradigm in the culture.
Yeah.
Where we're not so in a box of, hey, we don't want to get involved.
I think that goes, I mean, I think that like talking about suicide and awareness, prevention, all of that stuff is really important. Just like I think that a lot of things have been changing in the mental health area, like where
Hmm.
where people have been destigmatizing it a lot
Hmm.
more. Where I personally would openly talk about like my depression and my situations that I was in, and I mean, I just remember one night in particular on my stream where like everybody was kind of like venting and like letting it out, but it was like all in like a positive way. And it was just kind of to show that everybody goes through that stuff. And I think that like we can approach, you know, talking about suicide the same way.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's hard pressed to find somebody that hasn't been affected by suicide. Either you know somebody, it happened in your own family, you know, or you've heard about it. But yet we still don't talk about it openly, you know. And like you said, Hannah, you giving the outlet to say, you know, you had a time in your life where you were working through depression. It lets somebody else to say, you know what, okay, I'm okay, you know, I'm going to get through this. And we also don't talk about resilience. You know, we forget that you look back in your life and you were times that you were like, how did I get over like that breakup or something? You know, I think about some of the people that I dated in high school or even college. And I thought like when we had breakups, like that was it. And I can't even remember who they were, you know, like I don't even remember who I dated in high school and college, much less they broke my heart.
I remember like after a breakup, I was basically catatonic for a month. And like just looking back now, like I don't remember much about that era anymore. Like I made it through and like I remember being affected by it, but now I just look back and I'm just like, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. But we don't tell those stories, do we? Yeah. You know, we just hear about, oh my gosh, it was a heartbreak and, you know, we never got over it. But we do get through those things, you know, it's not that it doesn't hurt, but we do get through them. They're not something that is worth taking your life for.
Yeah.
You know, we've all had breakups. We've all had those pains. We've all flunked tests. We've all, you know, done things that you sort of go, yeah, that's a real winner. But
it might sound like a cliche, but I always do feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel like a lot of what makes your character is defined by how you react to failures in your life. A life without any failures is not really a life at all. You never had any like tribulations, and how you overcome those obstacles really defines your character.
I think that's what gives you like a reason to live too. It's just like, I did it. Yes.
Yeah. You almost have like these badges of like, hey, guess what? I got through this heartbreak. I got through this test that I never thought. And, you know, so I flunked this college test, but oh, well, I got through, you know, I still got a college degree. You know, that's what makes you part of your character. You know, it's your bumps and your bruises and your imperfections that sort of say you're really living your life.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Lodi, but when I got partnered on Twitch, it was like one of the best days of my life. And that was like the whole, like I had worked up to that for like 3 years and it felt so good when it finally happened. I don't know. It's like those moments.
And we don't, you know, it's like we don't rejoice in some of those things, you know, like what you just said, like that was one of like your best days of your life when you know, got partnered. You know, it's like sometimes those are those resilient factors of saying, you know what, I have had accomplishments. I have done great things. You know, we don't need to always pause, you know, to put the spotlight on all the things that we haven't done.
I think another thing to highlight is that a lot of times success is just, well, in our culture, it's a moving goalpost. And so a lot of times we don't really think 2-3 years ago, we now have what we aspired to have in the past. And we don't realize that we have it now because we're too busy looking at, you know, that.
What's next?
Yeah.
Yep. We don't look at the present. You know, it's like sometimes I always say to people, you know, make a to-do list. And the first thing on it is wake up and get up. Boom. You accomplished one thing. You did it. Woohoo. High five. You know? But we have these, like you said, these lofty goals of what we have to do. So we don't feel like we're getting anywhere.
I will go ahead and say, and like this might be a dicey topic, but I feel like our culture is flawed in that respect because we're always chasing wealth and status. And so then we never really get to appreciate the things around us in the present, the people, our friends, our pets and everything. Like we're too busy looking for that next thing. So I will be the first to say that like that aspect of our society is just completely flawed.
I agree with you. You know, we've forgotten about gratitude of what we have today, just today. You know, each day is a gift. And instead of saying, you know, oh yeah, but I could have this or I could have that or I could get this, you never are sort of content with just having that today, you know? And so you're right. You know, if we're always catching and waiting to get something, we actually aren't even living in the moment that we're in.
I know one
So,
thing that kind of helped me get through, or just like get past the point of my depression where I didn't feel like I couldn't get out of bed, was just like, okay, what's one thing today, or one or two things that I'm looking forward to? You know what? I get to eat a piece of chocolate cake today. That's gonna be the best thing ever. And it's just like small stuff like that, or like, you know, I don't like. I'm just trying to think of something like, oh, today at work I don't have to do this report because it's not this time of the, you know, it's not that time of the month, or just something
yeah.
like silly like that. But like those little things, it just kind of gives you a positive spin on the day, and then you're like, all right, let's do this, versus like, oh, I have to do this today, you know.
Yep. Well, they're attainable goals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got up, I got dressed, I brushed my teeth. Okay, I accomplished 3 things today. I'm getting this done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, instead of like, we have to make so much money, we have to have so much status, we have to have so much and so forth. You know, I've never ever read an obituary that said they died with this much in their bank account, their house was perfectly clean. You know, it's who they affected and who they were surrounded by and what they were loved. You know, I think if we lived more on the attitude of, you know, what we can do for others and how we live our life, instead of, you know, what's our bank account, what's the car we drive, what's the house that we do. You know, I can tell you right now, I'm sitting in my house, there's dog prints all over the windows because I have 2 Labradors that constantly look out the window, you know, and that's okay. You know, that means I'm living my life and my dogs are enjoying their life.
Mm-hmm.
So do you look like you have a question?
I was thinking, for some people, like that's actually cool that you don't really think about that too much. I will say, on the contrary, one thing that I found that it really helps is like when you first wake up and you make your bed and you like,
Mhm.
that is actually really beneficial because it starts you off with that first task and you get that sense of accomplishment, and that like it like you can build on that over the course of the day. I
Mhm.
find if you have a clean living like just your room, I mean if the rest of your house is dirty, whatever, but
Mhm.
like if your area that you spend the most time in is clean, that
Mhm.
can affect your mind in a very positive way. Whereas
Oh, absolutely.
I feel like
Absolutely.
a clean living space is very important, at least for me, to my mental state.
Yeah.
But, you know, and you can also declutter too. You
Hmm.
know what I'm saying? Sometimes we're like surrounded by stuff, but we're still not happy. You know, so
Hmm.
like you were having, like, if this is like the space that you spend the most time in, just
Hmm.
having it, you know, decluttered and feeling good, and, you know, if it's clean or if it's set the right way, or, you know, you have that feeling, that good feeling about it, it can be. You know, I think what I was talking about with the Labradors is like, take what's important to you, but
Hmm.
don't sweat the stuff that really doesn't matter to
Mm-hmm.
you,
I agree.
you know?
Mhm.
And if it's, you know, I love how you say that. It's how you said, you know, if I make my bed, that's sort of like my accomplishment and it sets my goal.
And it's relative too to each person, I find. So like again,
Abs-
this is something important to me, but I totally understand if not everyone is like on that wavelength, but it is relative.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that's cool to say, you know, it's whatever works for you,
Hmm.
you know? So like, you know that you're so in tune to yourself that you say, you know, when I make my bed, I feel like I've started my day, I've accomplished something, and it sets that tone. You know,
Hmm.
where somebody that maybe is like working through depression, they're like, you know what? I actually got up and I fully got dressed. I'm not in my pajamas anymore. I fully am in an outfit. To them, that is a huge accomplishment,
Mm-hmm.
and they should rejoice in that, you know? So I think it's so relevant of where you sit, you know, or somebody that has anxiety will be like, you know what? This was the first time I actually sat in a restaurant, and I sat in the middle of the restaurant instead of like in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Those are huge accomplishments that we just sometimes don't give ourselves credit for.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah. On the topic of self care, I know that like exercise, Lodi, has been like a huge impact for you. I just wanted to
I
talk about that a little bit too. So I was like really athletic in high school, and I played 3 sports. And then when I got into college, I started working a lot. Like I worked out a lot in college, and then when I kind of went into the real world, I worked so much that I didn't have any energy to like exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So I would get home and I would just like go right to bed pretty much, or like I would just sit on the couch. But I noticed like just like a very small thing that I did was I would go for like a walk, and it would literally not even be very far. It would just be like a block maybe. And that made like one of the biggest differences to me. And I think it was, part of it is just like, oh, I accomplished something for the day. I did a little bit of exercise. Better than nothing. But I know that like even like more rigorous exercise is really good for like releasing endorphins and just feeling a lot better. I don't know if you want to talk about that too a little bit, Lodi, but it's helped me tremendously.
I was gonna say there's a lot of small things that can really boost your mood, because there could be things that maybe, like for example, hygiene is a big one. Like, for example, like when you take a hot shower, like that releases good chemicals in your brain too, and that can give you that good boost to your day immediately. I feel like like the aspect of cleanliness, at least in your living space, is a big one for me. Hygiene, exercise, and
eating good too helps me a ton.
Yeah, I find that eating a good breakfast is really beneficial. Like something with like a fair amount of like protein and like carbs, and get like a balanced breakfast. Because I think about how I feel if I just have carbs in the morning, like my mood deteriorates really fast, and I'm like I get like standoffish. Yeah. I don't feel like myself. Like if I just had a bowl of cereal, for example, there's a lot of like little small things in conjunction that can really affect your mood.
Yep. And I also think sleep, I don't think we put an emphasis on getting enough sleep, We're
talking to the gamers out there. We know you like to stay up late.
Right. But then, have moderation, take a nap somewhere down the line, or get sleep. Your body needs to rest. It does. Many a times we'll hear people say, I live on 3 hours of sleep. It's like, your mind can't handle that. It just can't. I don't care what age you are. Sometimes people will be like, oh, I'm 16, I'm invincible, I can live on 3 hours. It will catch up to you. It will. And it will affect your mental health.
And especially if you're not going outside too much. I know a lot of gamers will be sedentary for most of the day in gaming. But at least take like a vitamin D supplement. Like that can definitely boost your mood. I've had good results with that. And that's not something that's always addressed. I think a lot of people just think that depression is like just some kind of imbalance going on. And that can be the case. But I feel like there's also a lot of other things that we might be neglecting that according to our biological like evolution, things we should be doing that we're just, because of our modern lifestyle, we're just turning a blind eye to.
Yep. They actually just came out with a study out of Canada that basically pretty much anybody south of or north of like, our Tennessees and our Oklahomas, that kind of stuff, we are deficient in vitamin D. And that we should be taking supplements or getting enough nutrition somewhere through a vitamin D, because we don't see enough sunlight.
That's true. And then also I know that testosterone for men is actually like at an all-time low, and that's a mood regulator as well as many other things.
Absolutely.
And so if you have testosterone that is low at even an age where it should be at its highest, that can definitely affect your line of thinking and get you down a path that you don't want to go down.
Exactly. And we know that, let's face it, we have a lot of pesticides and chemicals and preservatives in a lot of our foods, that we see that it's changing the way we think, the way that we act, and so forth. So definitely sometimes that clean living, can be beneficial. And let's face it, in moderation too. Yeah. Whatever you do is in moderation.
Yeah. I try for the most part. I've just noticed like a huge difference. Just like, first off, I lost a bunch of weight because I started eating healthier. I feel better. And then I'm like not getting like crashes and like, dips and spikes throughout the whole day. I think that just helps me like be a little bit more even keel. And there's so many studies out there that just show like the effect that food can have on people. It's just, I could go into details, but it's kind of crazy. And that's why I'm kind of like a big advocate of, try to at least get some greens and some like lean protein in your diet.
And I think, like you talked about, looking at mental health as a whole body, how it affects our spirit, how it affects our physical body. A lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to go on medication. Well, okay, maybe there's other alternatives to medication, like you talked about, looking at our vitamin D, looking at, maybe melatonin, which is natural for helping with our sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at all options, I think is really doing your due diligence when you're looking at your mental and your physical health. Exercise, let's face it, who hasn't had a bad day and they're like, I'm going out to the gym and punching my kickboxing, that's a great way to release it in a healthy coping skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that the body and the mind are very intertwined. And if one is like lacking or is not being cared for, it will affect the other. And you have to find that fine balance. In regards to fitness, I found that it was a great like stress relief for me. So I found myself staying there sometimes 2-3 hours and just having fun with it, because when I walked out, I just felt so good. Like it's a feeling that I can't really describe unless you've like done it. I highly recommend doing it. Like sign up to like, it's good. Like, and if you don't want to go to like a crazy gym, just sign up to like, Planet Fitness. It's like $10 a month, or you can work out at home. I know not everyone wants to work out at home. For me, I don't like to either. So I definitely go out to a gym just because otherwise I wouldn't be inspired to.
Yeah, I agree, and find where you fit in. If you're not a gym person, then, maybe there's a, stream that you can find, off of something and work from home, or get an exercise bike. I just did one of those, what is it called? Like Peloton bikes or whatever, where you have those like live people that like get you motivated. And I'm okay, and I was like, okay, seriously, like these people have so much energy, but after a while it was like, okay, wait a minute, I can like actually stand on this bike, like I'm not going to fall off, so like this is pretty good. So you have those little accomplishments, and like I said, find what fits for you. If going to hot yoga is something that really relaxes and grounds you, do it. If taking your dog for a walk, if it's just do something that you really enjoy for yourself. Definitely.
Everything we're talking about right now is just other ways that you can outsource your sanity, so to speak, to different things, where it's like different things, and instead of just one or two things. Like, so that's why I encourage gamers to not just use that. You can continue to game, but I really encourage gamers to have something else too, like a backup or a third or a fourth. Because eventually you might get diminishing returns. And I can definitely say, like, at one point in time, like, I was just focused on gaming, and eventually you kind of start not liking it as much, or like things don't really satisfy you in the same ways, because you get the diminishing returns because you're doing it too much. And it, like any other thing, it could become an addiction.
Yep. And actually, I think it's now a diagnosis addiction is gaming. And, like anything, you do it too much, alcohol, gambling, it can become an addiction. So when you say, have those fallbacks, maybe, going on a treadmill, getting out in nature, doing stress balls, have a bubble bath, for God's sakes, soak in some great Epsom salts, or do aromatherapy and get your scents. We know for a fact when your 5 senses are the most aroused is when you absolutely have some of the most clarity in your mental health. And so sometimes people will say, somebody was so suicidal. I always say, you know what? Get out your strongest scent, get the ice bucket, use your words, get all of those senses so aroused that can actually really de-escalate your suicidal thinking.
That's really good to know.
That is, yeah. Like, I can just imagine that, and like just imagining it, I can already tell it would be beneficial. Yeah.
Think about like when we smell something so potent, right? We're like, whoo, that sort of set me back. Suicidal thinking is really that unclear thinking in your head. So getting those senses aroused, be it a bright, brightness of a picture, or a visual picture, or a scent, or, textures. That's why like people have like worry stones, or things that like, tactile things that they hold in their pocket. That's texture. You're arousing your touch and saying, hey, I still am going. I still have it going on. So yeah, we always talk about the 5 sense rules. You have somebody that's really, really struggling, get every one of those senses totally aroused.
I definitely believe that because I know just even petting your cat or dog is a
Oh yeah.
de-stressor. So
Absolutely. Feeling their fur, hearing them either, like you said, a cat, purr or a dog, sort of make that great, hey, this is sort of cool noise or um, those are all things that we need as humans. That's why we have our senses in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
That's why music is so empowering. Why do people say music is my coping skill? Yeah.
Music is definitely mine. Like
Oh,
that's a huge
totally.
one for me.
Yep. I don't care if you're just the lyrics person or if you're just the beat person. Music can really touch your soul,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a great coping skill.
And even if you can't sing, I highly recommend like trying it anyway because I found that it's really cathartic to actually like express yourself in that way. Like just yelling feels good sometimes because in our culture, I feel like it's very common to internalize,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
especially like going back to that topic of how people feel ashamed to speak
Yeah.
about these things. So they're just internalizing it and it just cycles and it's like a feedback loop in their own brain.
Yep.
And isolation only exacerbates that. So when they're alone, they're left with those thoughts.
Oh,
So
definitely. Good point. Good point. We got to stop stuffing stuff inside us
Mm-hmm.
because eventually it's going to boil out.
mm,
And, I don't sing. My kids will tell me, they tell me not to sing.
I do it
But
anyway.
but I do it anyway. Absolutely. And I have those great conversations in singing in the car where, no one sees you, but, hey, whatever. But you're right. I think we have this attitude of let's not talk and, let's be, sort of that polite and, all we're doing is stuffing and
Yeah,
stuffing and stuffing.
exactly.
And we need a safe outlet to do it in a rightful way. So be it singing or whatever your gig is.
Right. Yeah, I think everything follows like the simple law of just tension and release. You can't just have all tension, you know? It's like it's old fashioned in a way, but I think like yin and yang is very much like
Mm-hmm.
how we should live and tension and release is like important. So I think of singing and like creative expression and uh just fitness, any of that stuff is release. So you need
Hmm.
those certain things. So just identify what the releases are for you that you like.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of times depression is just caused from a lack of release,
Uh,
whether that be words or like sharing.
I was gonna
And
say a good way to, a good way that I heard someone talk about depression was it's like a sprain of the brain. So
Yeah.
it's something that when it's going on, it's like hard to fix, but like it can be fixed. I've definitely seen like, I had like my life before my depression, and then I had my life during my depression, and then I had my life after. And like I can definitely say that like I fixed something that made it made my life more balanced.
Hmm. Hmm. And finding that balance, whatever it is for you, because one size doesn't fit all.
Yep,
Mhm.
exactly.
You
It's
know.
different for everybody.
Yep, exactly. So whatever worked for you, Hannah, might not work for somebody else. And we shouldn't say, like everybody should do this because it's like, hey, whatever works for you, do it. And if it's healthy, it's going to be healthy, mentally and physically as well.
Great.
And then practice those things. We don't, for somewhere down the line, our culture has assimilated, taking a bubble bath or taking a nap or being lazy. No, we're just sort of recharging our batteries because we certainly put our batteries and we utilize them very fast. I
Hmm.
remember one time I got to work with a woman that does therapy over in Australia. And she's like, you people are crazy over here. You work too hard, you stay up too long, you don't take enough time to yourself. And she's like, why do people go to the gyms at 11 o'clock at night? She's like,
Mhm.
that's just ridiculous.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, how many times do we have like 24-hour fitness places? And she was just saying how in Australia, they really, really live a balanced life. That yes, they work, but they also rest as much as they work.
Yeah, I think that's something like you were saying earlier, Lodi, that's kind of like embedded in our culture, like that workaholic kind of
Mhm.
mentality. Like you just got to keep working. If you really want to impress somebody, you got to put in the extra hours, like all that stuff. And I definitely can say from experience that taking that time to just have your balance every single week, like that the weekend is like your recharge, and if you work over the weekend, you're not going to get that, and that's when you're going to kind of get those
And I can
gross
say
thoughts.
definitely if you're over the age of 20, just a 30-minute to 1 hour nap can be really beneficial to boosting your mood. So I usually feel great after I wake up from a nap. And I imagine how I feel if I skip naps, I notice my mood changes a lot. And let's say I'm 29, so like at my age, like naps are really important. But also we just look at like human history, like we napped a lot, you know?
Yeah.
Our society changed how we lived within like the last 100 or so years dramatically, but we can't act like that's natural. We have to look back and honestly to understand like sometimes how we should be living. And naps, I think, are extremely important because I think about when I'm not feeling great, like either mentally, like my reaction is to want to sleep. And when I sleep, I wake up and I feel a lot better. Sometimes I forget why I was even like upset in the first place.
I've been there. I feel you.
Yep. Yep, exactly. And it's sort of like you said, it's like, oh, you're taking a nap during the day. Are you being lazy? No, I'm recharging my batteries. If we reframe it instead of thinking that, you're slacking, instead of, I'm doing this so I'm a better person and I'm mentally healthier, it's just reframing it in a different, more positive way. So absolutely, I'm all for naps. I think our world would be much happier if we, had naps and just some, good old fashioned downtime.
I agree, and I feel like our bodies are not like stupid. Like if your body wants to sleep when you're
Let
feeling
it.
bad, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, let it. How many times do people go to work and like, they have a cold and they're miserable and they're like, "Oh, I just want to sleep." Well, go to sleep. Your body's trying to heal itself. Let it do its stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We're fighting it the opposite way. Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I think that internalized puts more stress on us. And how many times people will check their work email now because it's on their phone, but you'll check it on weekends, even though you're technically supposed to be resting, or you get your notifications. And it's like we never feel like we can just turn it off, and we need to, be it unplug and just rest and say, yeah, I just want to be me.
Yeah. Okay, so we gotta wrap up in like 10
Oh,
minutes. Not
okay.
right now, but I was just gonna
Q&A?
like give you a warning.
Okay, thank you.
I was actually gonna say that because we definitely have some people in the chat that have brought up some things. If you guys have any questions and like anything maybe we didn't cover, feel
Yeah.
free to ask.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could do some like Q&A now, and Barbara, I was just gonna have you talk about the center just a little bit, and like I know that there's a couple services that you are pretty passionate about. I know we kind of talked about like taking care of ourselves, so Project Rest was one thing that I thought would be really important. And then I know you work with like schools and veterans and that kind of thing. I'll put a link in chat just in case you guys. So this is like, if you ever want to support the center, you can go to this page. Otherwise, that goes right to their website as well, and you can explore all the other things that they do. But I just thought maybe you'd want to talk about, if there's, obviously we're only in Wisconsin, so like there's only so many people that we can help, but you can always reach out as well
Right.
too.
Right. And Project Rest is sort of a movement where we're just saying, you know what? It's based off the rest symbol in the music world. That, it gives that pause that you're recognizing this is a pause in the music, but then you continue on. I think that's important in life. I sometimes think that we struggle and we get to a point where we're like, okay, what do we do? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing next. Take that minute to rest, pause, but then just continue on with it. And so we talk about just practicing that restful minute of, being mindful, doing things that make you happy. And we've gone over them with the self-care. So that's really what Project Rest is. It's that sort of movement of saying, guys, we have to get back to being a little less, always on the go, sort of thing. Another thing that we do with our veterans is we have a text line, and it's not just Wisconsin, it's across the United States. And you can simply text the word HOPELINE, HOPELINE, to 741-741. And it's 24/7. It absolutely is anonymous. You can text in because you had a bad day. You can text in because you just need somebody to vent to. You can text in because you had that bad breakup or you flunked a test or you're just feeling like I've lost my identity because I lost my job or I'm in a bad relationship and I don't know what to do. It's a totally 100% free service. And anyone can text any time of the day. And so with our veteran population, we do challenge coins. And if you don't know the history of a challenge coin, it was started way back in World War One, sort of giving that brotherhood of identity to say, you know, you fought for us and now we need to fight for them. And so these challenge coins are in the hands of a lot of our law enforcement, our first responders, and getting those veterans those coins to say, hey, we support you and there is help and you're not struggling alone. So, and we certainly do a lot of workshops and trainings. Even though we're located in Wisconsin, we do a lot of webinar things. So, like right now, in a couple weeks, we'll be training a great group down in Florida, all via web seminars. So you don't have to just be in our state to have some of that great training. And we really try to reduce the stigma. I think once we reduce the stigma and give people a more safe environment to talk about mental health and suicide, that's really where prevention starts in.
Great.
So, but questions and answers, definitely. This is a safe place to ask some of those questions that you go.
Right. So I see in chat, Nat's had a question. He says, how does one get support and where do you find people to work through issues?
So, like we talked about the text line, you certainly can text in 24/7, no matter what state you're in. And if you're looking for resources, they certainly can guide you to those resources. Like if you're looking for a therapist, or if you're looking for, a resource like, hey, you know what, I need help with my electrical bill or something like that. We certainly can get you to those resources as well. I think the biggest thing is reach out. People do care, and we do want to help you.
Yeah, and related to Twitch in general, like you will find communities that will hear you on that. There's definitely a lot of communities that are focused on that sort of thing. Like, for example, even within mine, you could go to Discord. That's it's your part of my community, so that's an option for you. Or if any friends that you might have, or even like you could go on. For example, I think there's a Reddit on that. For mental health, there's a lot of different ones.
Yep.
And it's completely anonymous.
And, the biggest thing is that you're reaching out to it. There's even some great apps out there that just help you with like calming down or breathing or mindfulness. The biggest thing is reach out. You do not have to feel like you're struggling alone. Find somebody that's safe, be it a safe group, be it your gaming group, be it your support group, be it friends. I think there's a true sense of you don't have to have a lot of friends, but you have to have some good friends.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question, Nats. So Simply Hella has a question. Do you think there's an issue with schools and the resources they provide? The high school my boyfriend attended has had 6 suicides within 6 months this past year.
Wow. That's a lot of suicides, and without knowing the background on it, I think, again, a lot of times we're afraid to talk about it. And it's not just one school. It's really all the way across that we have a culture that we have not put an emphasis on mental health. And now we're feeling the results of it. And I think, when she's talking about her boyfriend's high school is, we shouldn't have to have 6 suicides then to do something. So we have to go back to that being proactive versus being reactive. And, it can happen anywhere. And I think that's what's hard is it doesn't discriminate. And I hope that the students in that school and the staff are getting support, because 6 suicides is a lot of suicides to happen in one small area.
Yes, I agree. So one thing I was going to add also, since we were kind of talking about the Hope Line, and if anybody else has any more questions while I'm talking, feel free to just post them in chat. We can answer them. Was if you're a broadcaster on Twitch and you'd like to have like a little panel for the Hope Line, I've actually made one for the center, and we can give those to you guys if you want to have that as a resource underneath your stream. And then also, this was kind of my doing, but if you'd ever want to support the center, because I love them and I've done some charity streams. And on Twitch, we love doing charity. So the center is also on Tiltify. So if you guys ever wanted to do like a campaign to help them out and help them with their services, you can tell them what you'd like them to use the money for. So if you're like, I want them to use money to help veterans, you can tell them that and they will use it for that. Or, what was I going to say? I'm just trying to think of another example. Like,
You know, what's really cool is we recently just did an initiative where you can fill a box. And so we have boxes that are filled with Hopeline materials. So like, they might be like Hopeline posters and magnets and stress balls and, window clings. And so you can say, hey, you know what? I would love this to go to, school ABC. And we'll fill that box and send it to that school on your behalf. So we're really, really, really big about if you send us a donation and tell us where it's going to go, it goes there.
mm-hmm.
That's one of our biggest things.
Yeah. So yeah, for example, like Simply Hella, if there's, if you want to send resources to that school, that is something that it would go towards. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And the Department of Public Instruction endorses the Hopeline. So sometimes people are like, oh, maybe the school won't like it. The Department of Public Instruction, which oversees all of our schools, endorses the Hopeline. Ooh, I think we lost you.
oh, we still hear you.
Oh, I lost you guys. There we go. Whoops.
Yeah, you're still with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
There, I gotcha. There I am.
Yeah, I guess we don't have any other questions in chat. Do you have anything else that you'd want to talk about, Lodi, or ask last minute? Maybe we'll have to do this again. It was so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I had a few things jotted down, but I think we covered most of them.
I think the biggest thing is to have these kind of conversations. It gives a safe place to say that somebody out there is listening or gaming and saying, you know what, I'm not the only one that struggles. I'm not the only one that goes through hard times.
So the last topic was, and this pertains particularly to online environments, where there is sometimes a culture of trolls pretending that they have these issues to elicit a response. So I find, what is a good way to handle something like that? Because I feel like you don't want to disregard any of them because some of them could be real.
Right.
But at the same time, if it becomes a pervasive issue where like trolls are taking advantage, like sometimes like your stream might get posted on, say, like 4chan, and they're like, let's go troll this stream.
That's happened to me before.
Yeah. And
Did it?
so that's a real issue. So I find that directing people to the proper channels can help, but it's like, how would you identify like what's trolling, what's not?
I think that happens a lot. Unfortunately, people that are doing that, suicide's not a laughing topic. It affects people. And so for the people that are trolling, that's saying something about them.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that's illuminating that maybe they actually do need?
Yes.
But maybe they're projecting?
Yes.
Perhaps.
If you're going to that kind of extreme that you feel like you need to troll and go out on those type of paths, something's going on internally in you that you're trying to do that. So I would ask them to seek services. But I think, if you ask some pointed questions about, okay, you're talking about suicide. I'm worried about you. So here's some resources, and I'm going to ask you right out, do you have the means to kill yourself? Asking those really pointed questions, where if I was talking to somebody that I knew was truly suicidal, saying, are you thinking of killing yourself? Do you have a plan? What is the plan? Do you have means? Meaning like, do you have a firearm? Do you have pills? So forth and so forth. Asking those pointed questions to get down to it usually gets to somebody that's sort of like you call it trolling. Is like, whoa, this isn't game playing anymore. This is reality. Gets them off that path to say, okay, this isn't funny.
So this is something that has ramifications outside of the internet too. So that's interesting to note, because I thought maybe this was, obviously the anonymity of the internet will make that more prevalent, but it's interesting that you say that it happens outside of the internet too. And I'm
Oh,
also
sure.
being very careful not to like say in real life, because obviously I think the internet is also life.
Sure it
Like
is.
I think when people say, in real life and the internet, it's like a
Online
disconnect.
versus offline.
Yeah, like if someone reaches out like online, it's not as big of a deal because it's not in real life, but it is life. Like
Mm-hmm.
It is
these are
connection.
real people. They're not just names.
Connection is connection, no matter
Mhm.
what it is, be it face to face or being in a gaming community or whatever it is, it's still connection.
I agree.
So, yep. So asking those really pointed questions and getting down to why are they doing this in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And definitely giving them all the resources. So if they really aren't trolling, that they certainly have every single one of those resources on hand, that they can get help if they really are in a bad spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would even say to encourage them to take that first step and let you know later on at a different junction how it worked out for them and like go from there.
Hmm.
But I guess you would be able to separate the people who are trolling from the ones who are not
Hmm.
based off of like whether or not they do take that step. Like
Right.
if they don't come back or say anything, like
Hmm.
that could be very telling.
Yep.
Also,
We,
you
yeah.
can, I don't know, like, you can usually tell if they're, like, joking because they'll say something kind of silly or whatever. Um, I do think, yeah, I do think if they're serious, they would, like, answer those pointed questions or, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
something would come of that. That's more serious.
That's a good idea though. I never thought about asking that sort of question. Usually, um, yeah, that would be illuminating. Like however they respond with that. If they're trolling, they might give you like a
Hmm.
a, a really unrealistic response.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Absolutely. And then say, okay, here's the hope line. You can text it. You know what? I'll wait for you while you text it. And what was your response? You know, if
Mhm.
if you know the text line, you're going to get a response. You're going to have somebody that's going to assess them if they are suicidal. They're in good hands. If they're trolling, they're not going to do that. They're
Right.
just going to sort of say, okay, well, never mind. So I think asking those really pointed questions drills down to, are you truly thinking about suicide? And we have people that a lot of times will come in and be like, I could just kill myself. Well, let's drill a little bit farther down. The
Mm-hmm.
situation is embarrassing or something happened, but is it really worth killing yourself? No.
So that also leads me to another important point that I don't think we got to talk about is that um, when someone comes to you with that information, what do you find are very like useful ways to talk them down from it? I've found that a lot of times people will mention the effect it'll have on their family or
Hmm. Hmm.
their friends and how destructive that can be. And like there's even statistics that say like
Yep.
financially for the country,
Yep.
like one in every like 25 suicides cost 69 billion or something.
Every
It's
suicide costs about 1.2 million to the
yeah,
United States of America.
there's a yeah, it's
Hmm.
very expensive.
Hmm.
And some people, for example, what do you say to someone who says that they don't have anyone that would care?
You know what? And that's what I have done. I mean, that's one of my trainings is I'm trained in that negotiation and de-escalation skill.
Mhm.
And, it's really just reaffirming that they have purpose. And so, like you brought up one of them, how is this going to affect your family? And saying, you know what, your family's never going to get over this. No matter what you say, your family's never going to get over this. What are you going to do about your dog? You're the only one that can pet that dog. Who's going to take care of your dog once you're gone? You're really, again, getting to they need to be here and why they need to be here. So whatever it is that they're connected to. Also, I think, remember how we talked about our five senses?
Mhm.
Getting those five senses aroused. Also, backing somebody up. And so recently I had somebody that, was very suicidal. And I started with, what happened this morning? What did you have for breakfast? And let's walk yourself through your day. You're basically sort of taking your mind and bringing it down and
Mhm.
saying, you know what? It's really hard to think about suicide while I'm trying to
Oh,
answer these questions
absolutely.
about, you know what? I had Cheerios this morning. And after Cheerios, I think I took my dog out. You're sort of distracting your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and getting them off of that subject instead of letting suicide try to drive the boat. So those de-escalation skills can be simply asking them questions. And let's face it, tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
You start acting out of fear, it's going to put fear back in them. So slow your tone down, talk in a smoother voice, talk in a more lower voice. Don't come at it with a fear base, because it's just going to be like, whoa.
Freak them out more.
And so those are all type of things that you can do to de-escalate somebody. And definitely sit there and say, you know what, we can figure this out together. No matter, look at it as a team effort. Whatever you're going through, even if I don't know, we can figure it out together. Because they feel it, that they're absolutely alone, and that whatever this pain is inside them, they're feeling that it's unbearable. So sort of take one chunk at a time. Oh, this girl just broke up with me. Okay, I'm sorry that hurt. Don't minimize it, but sorry that hurt, but let's look at this all over. What are your positives? Why do you have reasons to live?
Mm-hmm.
So, because a lot of times they don't see all the reasons that they should be living. They just see all the reasons that their pain is too unbearable.
Good to know. That's actually really, like, I have, like, as you're saying all this stuff, like, I'm thinking of, like, shows that I've watched. Okay, this is kind of silly, but, like, the way that they talk to them is exactly what you said. Like, what'd you do today? What'd you have for breakfast? Do you have a wife? Are you married? Like, all this stuff, like, things like that. And I'm like, that makes a ton of sense, like, now that you explained it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There was one person had called, and they were determined to drive their car 100 miles an hour, down a freeway. And we literally just started off with hey, what are you wearing today? What did you have for breakfast? And let's just walk yourself through the day, before they safely pulled aside and we got law enforcement involved. It's slowing that mind down and getting out of that unclear thinking.
I can see why that would be useful, especially because if they're in a very emotional state, activating the logic center of their brain could really distract them from that. However, I do have a question. For example, this might work for first time, but let's say someone has done this multiple times and they're aware of negotiation tactics. They're like, hey, I know what you're doing. I've been in this situation before. How do you talk to them in that situation then?
Sure. So someone that's been in the system, that hey, Barb, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get me to figure out what I had for breakfast this morning. That's not going to work. I think when you have somebody like that, then you have to have a different approach and say, you know what I'm going to ask. You know what I'm here. Let's have this open conversation. Really what's going on today? What is it that is making you literally think that suicide's the option, and not skirting the issue around and around? Really concentrating on, what is it? Why is suicide thinking it's your best option today? Because it's a lie. So let's figure out why it's lying to you. Sort of that matter of fact. I'm not going to let you off the hot seat for a while until you get out of that suicidal thinking.
Good to know. Okay, we have time for a final question. It's a long one in chat.
Okay.
That was a
I'm
good
ready.
answer, by the way. That was very, very thought out.
Yeah. No, I'm surprised that she had such a great answer for that.
I'm trying to answer your questions.
Yeah, good questions and good answers. Okay, so I'll try to read this one the best I can. All right, Rando says, I have sort of a long question. I have a friend who suffers from clinical depression and has once expressed thoughts of suicide to me during one of his lower points. He has sought medical attention for it and was taking medication, but has stopped taking the medication for a while. He's a very independent person. When the subject is brought up, he's expressed that he's the type of person who doesn't like or want to talk about it, and that's something he'd rather deal with himself. What would be the best way to encourage him to continue seeking treatment? Or even to talk to him. I know that's so hard when somebody doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah. And you know what? Couple things. He said that he was on medication and now he's stopped. Just as going on medication, you can have side effects. People don't realize going off of anxiety or depression medicine is not safe to just stop. Your body needs an adjustment. You usually have to wean yourself off those medications. So a lot of times people will say, you know what, I don't like medication. I don't like the side effects. I'm just going to put it on the shelf and not take it. That's actually dangerous. And people can get suicidal thinking because they stop that medication. And you know what? We get it. We get that people will say, the side effects with medication. But then you know what? Then let's look at other options. For one, there's numerous medications out there. There's numerous holistic different medications. There's energy work. There's, like we just talked about, like vitamin D, exercise. There's different methods other than medication. There's therapies. There's a lot of different options. And he's being an awesome friend that he still is talking to him and saying, hey, I'm worried about you. And you know what? Even if he's coming back and saying, hey, I don't want to talk about it, he knows that you're on his radar. And that means that he knows that you're a good friend and that you're safe. And so I just encourage him to keep on asking it, but just in different ways. So, hey, bud, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about when people go off their medication. Are you feeling any of these kind of things? Because you said you went off your medication. That might open up one thing. And say, I always love blame it on us, when you hear a podcast or when you hear something on YouTube, say, hey, guess what? I watched this really cool series and it talked about this and this. It's opening up the conversation, and that's what you want to do. The biggest thing is don't ignore him. Don't defriend him. They might put up that resistance, but just keep on trying to be gently reminded. And at any time, if you feel he's suicidal, get somebody involved. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Great. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end. I hope you both agree. This has been awesome, and I've learned so much in these past 2 hours.
Thanks very much for both of you for bringing this up.
Yeah, so just so that the audience knows, the VOD for this, if you ever want to refer back to it, we're going to put it on the Center for Suicide Awareness's YouTube channel, and then Lodi and I will also probably run it on our channels, just to have like something for a rerun, and we can also support that way.
Awesome.
But yeah, if any of you guys ever want to reach out, you can definitely reach out to Center or one of either I or Lodi. We're totally open to anything. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we end?
Nope.
Just thanks for the people who are here and listening, and I hope it was enlightening for you guys. I learned a lot myself, and I can see myself doing more in this line of work later on, like especially now that Barb has really been informative on that topic. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Lodi. I'm glad. We had some great questions and some great insights. And, the more you can have openness about this subject, the more it can just be everyday conversation. And that's how you prevent suicide.
Yeah, thank you guys both for being on and coordinating all of our schedules together.
Yay!
Yeah, of course, you guys. All right, well, you guys have a great night. And you'll see us on our streams, I'm sure. Maybe we'll get Barb on there more often now.
That'd be awesome. I'd love it.
Okay, perfect.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone have a great night.
Great night. Bye-bye.